Would you like to have a Baldur's Gate 3 character who hits for like 100 damage per attack and who has all the versatility and powerful battlefield control of a high level spellcaster, and who gives you that sweet, sweet dopamine rush of seeing critical hit pop up over and over again? Then you should try playing as a Shadowblade Crit Fisher. So, this character build is a kind of improvement on some older crit fishing builds that I've been playing around with in this game. The video description has a link to my last video walking through some of those builds in more detail. The idea of those builds was to make critical hits happen very often by reducing your critical hit threshold and by making a lot of attacks with advantage, and to make those critical hits do a lot of damage by stacking up a lot of different sources of damage dice. Those builds included a few damage dice that happened to do psychic damage, and I noticed that those synergize really well with the Resonance Stone, which is a thing you pick up near the end of Act 2, which doubles your psychic damage. So the idea of this build is to go all in on that strategy, focusing on doing a ton of damage dice worth of psychic damage, making them be twice as many damage dice by getting critical hits most of the time, and doubling all of that by carrying around the Resonance Stone with you. The key to making this work is Shadowblade, a humble little level 2 spell that summons a sword that you can use all day for 2d8 psychic damage per hit. And when you reach higher levels, you can upcast this so it does 3d8 and eventually 4d8 psychic damage. For comparison, the Render of Mind and Body short sword that I was using in my previous crit fishing build was only doing 1d8 psychic. So the main ingredients of this build are as follows. You need to have Shadowblade, and you need high level spell slots to cast it with. That means you need to be either a sorcerer, a warlock, or a wizard. You also need to be able to make multiple attacks, and you need items and class features that make it easy to get critical hits. That means you need ways of getting advantage reliably, and you need ways of lowering your critical hit threshold. When we look at a couple of demos of this build in action, I'll walk you through these items and class features in more detail. But long story short, what's going to work really well for this is to be a 9th level caster, either a Bladesinger or a Hexblade, plus a 3rd level champion fighter. And you stack up a bunch of items that lower your crit threshold. And at the end of the video, we'll talk a little bit more about alternatives and tweaks you could make to this general template. The upshot of all of this is by the end of Act 2, you'll be doing about 40 damage per hit when you don't get a critical, and about 80 when you do get a critical. And you'll be getting criticals like a third of the time to a half of the time, depending on several things. So even when you don't get a critical hit, this is better straight up damage than pretty much anything I've played other than the famously overpowered Tavern Brawler Monk. And when you do get a critical hit, it's damage that's pretty much unrivaled. And on top of that, you're a high level wizard or warlock, so when necessary, you can drop those great spells like Fear, Hold Monster, Cone of Cold, etc. And once you get a little ways into Act 3, so you can cast 5th level Shadowblade, you're going to be doing like 60 damage when you don't crit and over 100 damage when you do crit. So let's take a more detailed look at how this build looks at 2 different points in the game. First, at the end of Act 2, where it really starts to pop, and then again at the late game, where it reaches its full potential.
Here we are down in the Illithid colony, and we've just gotten our biggest power spike in the game because we just picked up the infamous Resonance Stone. So let's take a look at how this build looks at this point, where you get the biggest power up for the build in the game. So you'll be around level 9, you'll have all these items, and you will have just gotten the Resonance Stone. So remember, the goal of this game or the goal of this build is to kind of build around this Resonance Stone's steeped in bliss ability, which gives everyone around you vulnerability to psychic damage, so they'll take double psychic damage. So this whole build is focused on just doing as much psychic damage as you can and letting that be doubled. Our main source of psychic damage is the Shadowblade, which I've cast as a 3rd level spell, so it does more than usual. If you cast it as a 2nd level spell, it does 2d8, but because it's 3rd level, it does 3d8. The next big power spike we're going to get is when we hit wizard level 9, and we can cast it as a 5th level spell, so it'll be doing 4d8. But that's still 3 levels away, so that's going to be like mid-act 3 that we get that. Other than that, we've got a few little sources of extra damage. The one that's giving us extra psychic is this strange conduit ring that gives us extra psychic damage as long as we're concentrating on something. We have a lot of ways to keep concentration up all day long. So the one I use most often is this Ever-Seeing Eye amulet that lets you cast protection from evil and good once per short rest. This is very nice because this is a spell that stays up as long as you concentrate on it. So if you don't ever trip and fall on ice or cast a different concentration spell, you can essentially concentrate on this all day. But for those times when you do lose concentration for one reason or another, you can recast it on your next short rest. If you've still got a lot of time until your short rest, we have plenty of other concentration spells we can do. We can cast this same spell again with a spell slot. She's a wizard, so she's got plenty of spell slots. There's other great concentration spells. So there's a lot of ways to keep your concentration up and always be doing this extra psychic damage. Another potential source of extra psychic damage that I could use, but am not currently, is the Shadow Cloaked Ring. This ring, if you're wearing this whenever you attack someone who's not in bright light, then you do an extra d4 damage of the same type as your weapon. So if you're attacking with this psychic weapon, this would do an extra d4 psychic damage. The reason I'm not using it is because I need that ring slot for something else, and we'll talk about why in a little bit. Another potential source of psychic damage that I could have had but didn't is I could have been a half orc, so then whenever we get a critical hit, which we're doing a lot, I would be doing another d8 of psychic damage. I just didn't do it because I felt like since this character is built around Shadowblade, I should make a shadowy drow character. You can also see this character's name. It's just a bunch of different words for shadow or shade. But if you were optimizing, you would make this a half orc, right? So those are the sources of psychic damage. We have other little sources of other damage. There's fire here and there's other stuff, but that's not really crucial to this build. The psychic damage is what's important. So we've got a lot of psychic damage. We're making it double by having the resonance stone on, giving everyone around you vulnerability to psychic. The other thing that's going to increase this even more is that we're going to try to get critical hits as often as we can, because those are going to almost double it roughly on average on top of everything else that's happening. So the way we get more critical hits is we reduce the critical threshold and we attack with advantage, so we can roll more dice. The ways that this character is reducing her critical threshold are, number one, she's a champion fighter, so she gets improved critical, which lowers her threshold from 20 to 19. On top of that, we drank an elixir of viciousness first thing in the day, so that lowers it again down to 18. We're holding this Knife of the Undermountain King, which lowers it down to 17. And we've also got the Covert Cowl on, which lowers the critical threshold down to 16 when we're not standing in bright light. So like I mentioned, there's a lot of synergies with trying to stay in the dark with this character, between the Covert Cowl, possibly wearing this Shadow Cloaked Ring, and another ability of this blade, which we will talk about in a moment. So those are the things that get our critical threshold down to 16 or 17. The other way to make yourself more likely to crit is to roll more dice, so there's more chances for one of them to be 16 or higher. And the way we're doing that is by attacking with advantage all the time. Our source of advantage is the Risky Ring, so that's giving us advantage on every attack. I should note that the Risky Ring is actually redundant much of the time with this character, because she's already getting advantage much of the time from this ability that I just hinted at, the Shadow Blade ability attached to the Shadow Blade. It also happens to be attached to the Knife of the Undermountain King, for what it's worth. So this gives her advantage on attack rolls, against anything that's not in bright light, which is going to be the situation a lot of times. So in those situations, the Risky Ring isn't doing anything extra for you. So if you wanted, you could forgo the Risky Ring and just rely on this. The reason why I'm not doing that is because there are times when the thing that you really need to kill right away is standing in bright light, and then you would be kind of screwed. So for those situations, I just want to keep the risky ring on all the time, so that I'm not, unable to get my big damage, my critical hits and whatever some of the time. It's a personal choice. You could decide to, take the risk of sometimes not being able to attack with advantage and whatever, and take the risky ring off and give yourself this instead, so that, when things are in shadow, which is much of the time, then you're doing more damage. It's up to you. It does mean that, kind of ironically and counterintuitively, wearing the risky ring is the less risky strategy, because you're guaranteeing yourself advantage all the time, except when something's giving you disadvantage. Whereas not wearing the risky ring is actually risky, because it means sometimes you're not going to get advantage. So this is the build at this point, right? We're level 9, so that's kind of the minimum level that you can be to have extra attack from your level 6 wizard, and improved critical hit from level 3 fighter. And that also is about the time where we get the resonance stone, which is what's really going to make this pop. So now that we've got all those pieces in place, let's come in and murderize some mind flayers with psychic damage. Give them a taste of their own medicine.
Mind flayers and civilians, side by side. To every of them, the device is open to your tactile command, to your authority.
All right, here we go. Let's see how this does. He is steeped in bliss, so we're going to be doing double. Critical hit, 84 damage. Look at that. We just did 90 damage to him in one hit. Now, unfortunately, we can't attack him again because he charmed us. And we can't reach the other mind flayers. Can we reach this mind flayer? We can. Let's just have Scary Asteri kill this Intellect Devourer first, so it doesn't opportunity attack us on the way. Yeah, pop one of those up. Why not? For fun. Okay. Can you kill it? Oh, what? Just a moment ago you had enough movement. Now you don't. There we go. Come on, kill it. Killed it. Beautiful. Now we have a bonus action that we can't do anything with. It's fine. Alright, Shadowblade time. Can you kill this one? Finish him off. Let's do it. Yeah. Critical hit for 100 damage. That was only a little bit because I think number one, that guy was, it might have actually been steeped in bliss. I didn't look, but since I'm using the bow, I don't have a lot of, yeah, I was steeped in bliss. But my bow was only doing a tiny bit of psychic damage. It was only, oops, my bow doesn't have psychic damage by itself, so it only has that 1d4 from the Strange Conduit ring, which became 2d4 because it was a crit, which was then doubled because it's steeped in bliss. All right. Some math for today. There we go. All right, so that is how this build looks at the moment you've got Resonance Stone. As you can see, we're critting on most of our attacks, and when we crit, we're doing like 100 damage. So that's great. Now we will check how this build looks again once we reach level 9 Wizard, which again is going to be the next big power spike. Okie dokie, here we are at the House of Grief, and we have just reached level 12, which means we've reached essentially the maximum potential of this character. So let's look at how things look when this character has reached her fullest potential. The most important change to the character is now that we're level 12, we've reached level 9 as a wizard, which means we now have a level 5 spell slot, which means we can now cast Shadowblade at level 5, which makes it do 4d8 psychic damage instead of 3d8. So that's going to be the main improvement to the character. A couple other little things that help are on the way to reaching level 9 wizard, we got another feat. And so we took Savage Attacker. That gives, on a 1d8, that will average out about 1 extra damage. But keep in mind that because we're doubling all our damage with this Resonance Stone, 1 extra damage is 2 extra damage, and we're doing 4d8, which is going to become 8d8 on a critical hit. So this one feat is giving us like 8 to 16 more damage. I think it's a worthwhile trade-off for a feat. And the other big improvement is we picked up this Deadshot bow, which gives us a further reduction of 1 to our critical hit threshold. So those are the main changes from what it was before. Other than that, nothing really new. We picked up some new armor, but that's not essential to the build. It's just some random new shit we got. So now that we're at level 12, let's take a look at how this character performs, killing a whole bunch of different people. And what better place to do that than the House of Grief, where we're going to fight like 1 million people. So let's just cast a couple spells on us before we run in here and talk to Viconia. Alright, let's go in. Hey, Viconia.
already have The artifact was your last chance to prove yourself. You there!
Ooh, everyone gets to go first. That's nice. Okay, let's kill the big guy. And that's sad. Would have been nice to get a crit right off the bat. We'll get one eventually. There we go. 100 damage, that's fine. Okay, killed you. Who else can we kill? Maybe we can kill 2 of these. Ah, that's a shame. I still want to kill these. Oh, here. Let's turn these off before we stab you. There we go, now we're in shade. And we got a crit. 130 damage. Beautiful. Oh, you know what I forgot to do? I forgot to turn on Blade Song before we did all this. Whatever, it's fine. Everyone run up here so I can have a lot of people to kill on my next turn. Or I could just cast Fear. This is what I'll do. I'll cast Fear on, and then whoever's not feared, I'll kill. Actually, what I would rather do is kill Viconia. Okay, yeah, here, let me do this. Let me take... is there a way for me to trigger an opportunity attack from her and hopefully don't get my haste broken? Come on, this way. Okay, okay. Come on, Viconia. There we go. Yeah, I'll kill you first. Fear can be next time. Oh, seriously? Maybe Fear will be this time. Nobody hit me. My AC is not even that good. Oh, I can't do that. I'm concentrating on haste. We'll just kill these other random people. This won't kill her. Alright, here we go. Time to kill Viconia. Well, unless she gives herself Sanctuary again. It won't matter if I get a critical hit on her. Speak of the devil. It's at 128. Of course, now I can't reach anyone. Oh, I could have reached someone. I could have dashed. Oh well. I don't care anymore if people put me in darkness. Everyone else is fearful. No one's gonna get me. Okay. Oh. Shame I put that radiating orb on her now. We're not in darkness. It's fine. We don't even need a critical hit to kill her. In fact, since we don't need a critical hit, let's just do that. I think we got a critical hit anyway. I forgot to have this on the whole time. Oh no, that wasn't a critical hit. Let's dash. Critical hit. There we are. That's how the character looks at level 12. On non-critical hits, she does 60 damage. Critical hits, like 100, 120 damage.
Alright, so having seen the build in action, let's go over some of the limitations of this build. First of all, there are some enemies that are immune to psychic. It's very few, it's mostly just constructs, but it does include at least one pretty tough enemy, the Steel Watcher Titan. For enemies like that, you're going to need to rely on your spells, your other party members, maybe bring a different weapon. For the Steel Watcher Titan in particular, you need someone to be chucking those flashbang grenades, whatever they're called, so this character could be doing that. There are also some enemies who won't take double psychic damage from this build. This includes creatures that are resistant to psychic, which are mostly adepts of the absolute, but there are also a few Githyanki. And it also includes undead who just aren't affected by the steeped in bliss condition from the resonance stone for some reason. Against those enemies, this build is still good, but it's not as amazing as it is against everyone else. By the time this build is coming online, you won't have a lot of those enemies anyway. There won't be a lot of undead or a lot of adepts of the absolute left to fight. But there are a couple powerful bosses who are undead. There's the Apostle of Merkel, there's Ansur. So these two limitations, like the fact that some enemies are immune to psychic and some enemies are resistant or are, not taking double damage, I don't really consider these to be serious limitations of the build because they're shared by pretty much any build. Like almost any damage type is going to run into problems with at least a few enemies that are resistant or immune to that damage type. That's just a part of the game. So I think you're going to encounter this with any build. Now, moving on to other limitations, another slight limitation of the build is that this build doesn't become super powerful until the end of Act 2. And if you compare against my old crit fishing builds, this is an even later point of coming online, right? My older crit fishing builds got good at the beginning of Act 2. This one doesn't get good until the end of Act 2. But I actually think the problem of coming online late is less serious in this build than it is in the other ones, even though the build comes online later. That sounds counterintuitive, but the reason the problem is not so serious in this build is because this character is actually still pretty good even before the build becomes fully online. I mean, like if you're a Bladesinger, you've got Blade Song, which is just a really good ability, especially early in the game. Shadowblade still does decent damage even before you become an overpowered crit fisher. You've still got like hold person, fear, good spells. So while this build doesn't become super overpowered until late in the game, it's still good before that. And it's good enough to get you through the challenges of Act 1, which is where, it's the hardest part of the game. So that's different from my other crit fishing characters, which do get powerful earlier, but they kind of suck before that, and especially in Act 1. Right? So that's the second limitation of the build, but like I said, it's not really a big limitation. The last and most serious limitation of the build is it looks kind of stupid. The way the Bladesinger like twirls around and stabs out with the short sword, it just looks kind of silly. You're going to have to be looking at this for the entire game, and it doesn't look very badass. So if that is something that ruins your fun, take that into account. So those are the limitations of the build. Let's talk a little bit about alternative ways you could set up this build to be a little bit different. There are two big changes you could make to this build. One is that you could consider being a Hexblade instead of a Bladesinger. And the other big change is you could try to get Paladin smites. These two choices aren't mutually exclusive, so you kind of have a 2x2 table of builds you could do. You could be a Bladesinger without smites, which is what I showed you in this video, or you could be a Bladesinger with smites, or you could be a Hexblade without smites, or you could be a Hexblade with smites. So the two big decisions are Bladesinger versus Hexblade and Smite versus no Smite. Let's walk through each of these two big decisions in turn, starting with the Smites issue. Now, the build I've shown here, it needs to get up to level 9 Bladesinger to get your 5th level Shadowblade, and it wants level 3 Champion Fighter to help you get more critical hits, and that just doesn't leave enough room for Paladin levels because you're up to level 12. There's no more levels to get. But we all know that a crit fishing build likes to have some Paladin levels in there so that you can drop a big smite during a critical hit when you really need it. We could do that, but then we'd have to trade something else off. So one option would be that we don't go all the way up to Bladesinger 9. You could be Bladesinger 6, Champion 3, Paladin 2. That way you get your smites, you get your extra attack, and you still have one level left to play around with. The problem with doing that is that you won't be able to get up to the level 5 spell slots if you do that. And I just don't think getting smites is worth the cost of losing your extra d8 of psychic damage from the 5th level Shadowblade. Let's do a little bit of math to compare what you get out of having a smite versus what you get out of having an extra d8 of Shadowblade. And let's assume, for argument's sake, for this math, that you're only smiting when you get a critical hit, and you're only smiting when it's really useful to smite. Now, a level 1 smite is normally 2d8 radiant damage, and on a critical hit, that's becoming 4d8. Right? So smite is getting you 48 damage. With a 5th level Shadowblade compared to a lower level Shadowblade, you're getting an extra 1d8 psychic, which on a critical hit is going to be 2d8. And because of the resonance stone, you're usually getting that doubled, so it's usually going to be a similar amount as 4d8. Right? So smite is getting you about 48 damage. A 5th level of Shadowblade is getting you about 48 damage. And the difference between these is a Shadowblade, unlike a smite, it's not costing you a spell slot every time you use it. It does cost that 5th level spell slot up front, but then you can use it unlimitedly. Now, granted, there are some situations where a smite will do more damage than the 4d8 that I just mentioned. If you're using a higher level spell slot to do your smite, or if you're smiting a fiend or an undead, it's going to do extra. But what that's trading off is that you can't do that all the time, right? You only get that some of the time. I would also be remiss not to mention that some of the toughest fights you have with fiends or undead are ones that you can't really smite anyway because they have like radiant retort or some version of that, and you'll just kill yourself if you smite them. So all that is to say that neither smites nor the higher level Shadowblade is like obviously mathematically better than the other. Each of them is better in some situations and not better in some other ones. So there's not really a strong across the board reason to prefer one over the other. But I should note that here I only talked about what happens when you get a critical hit. When you don't get a critical hit, the 5th level Shadowblade is just better. It's just doing more damage compared to hitting without any smite at all. So if you go the smite route, you're gaining something that is occasionally better on critical hits in exchange for making yourself worse at almost everything else. So that's an argument against bringing in smites. On the flip side, like, are there any arguments for bringing in the smites? Well, there's versatility in that, when you want to do radiant damage against something, you can. There's another kind of versatility which I talked about in my previous crit fishing videos. So if you have seen that crit fishing video, you may remember that I said I like having smites because it gives me versatility in terms of getting to choose when I really turn up my damage. In that video, I mentioned that I like a character that always does pretty well, but that also has options they can really turn up to 11 when they really need to. And I said that having smites gives you that. So all of that might look like an argument in favor of going the smite route, but actually I think smites don't really add a lot of interesting versatility of that type to this build, and here's why. So with smites, like, the only choice you're really getting is a choice between doing decent damage versus doing even more damage, and sure, that's a choice, but like, it's not a super meaningful choice. Whereas on the other hand, with this build, if you're getting these high-level wizard spell slots, you're getting a much more interesting kind of choices, because your choices aren't just do I want to do big damage or even bigger damage? But you're getting choices more like, do I want to kill this one guy with big damage, or do I want to cast fear and lock down 4 people this round? Right? And I just find those like a little bit more qualitatively interesting choices. So overall, the upshot of all of that discussion is I feel like you really don't want to sacrifice your high wizard levels to get smites here. That you're just getting too much benefit out of the higher wizard levels, and smites are not worth it to lose that. So we can't sacrifice our wizard levels to get smites. But what about sacrificing our fighter levels? So, for example, we could do Bladesinger 9 and Paladin 3 instead of Bladesinger 9 Champion Fighter 3. That way we'd get smites and we'd still have our big wizard levels. I'm also not a big fan of sacrificing those many fighter levels, though, and here's why. So, previously, when I talked about the reason we go up to fighter level 3, I mainly presented that as being like a way to get a reduction to the critical hit threshold. But there's another really important thing we're getting from those fighter levels, and that's Action Surge, which we get at fighter level 2. Action Surge is just really useful on this character. It means that you can run in, you can cast fear on a bunch of people, and then whichever person saves, you can Action Surge and kill that person. Or you can just make a ton of attacks and take out a bunch of people before they get turns. Action Surge, it's just one of the best abilities in the game on any character. Everyone already knows that. I'm not telling you anything you don't know. So for that reason, I don't think Bladesinger 9 Paladin 3 is better than Bladesinger 9 Fighter 3, right? You're getting smites, but you're sacrificing Action Surge. Not a good trade, I think. But with all that being said, if you go the Bladesinger route, I think there actually is one way you can get smites without losing all of the good stuff, right? So you can get smites without losing your high-level wizard slots and without losing Action Surge. The way to do that is if you go to Bladesinger level 8, Fighter level 2, and Paladin level 2. If you do that, you get just enough caster levels to reach 5th level spell slots. And the reason for that is because Paladin levels are Paladin is a half caster, so 2 levels of Paladin is like 1 level of Wizard. So Bladesinger 8 Paladin 2, that's like a Bladesinger 9 in terms of the spell slots you get. So if you do this, you're not losing your Action Surge because you got 2 levels of Fighter. You're not losing your high level spell slots because your Bladesinger 8 Paladin 2 is enough to get the 5th level spell slots. And you're still getting smites. The only thing that you're losing out on is that reduction to critical hit threshold that you would have gotten from Champion Fighter level 3. How much difference does that make? Let's do some math again. If you're a little bit into Act 3 and you've got the items that I've shown in these builds so far, then your critical threshold is going to be 16 when you're in Bright Light and 15 when you're not in Bright Light. That means that if you don't take Champion Fighter, your threshold is instead going to be a 17 or 16 instead of a 16 or 15. How much is that affecting your chance to get a critical hit? Well, when you're in Bright Light, you're going from a 44% chance with Champion Fighter to a 36% chance without it. When you're not in Bright Light, you're going from a 51% to a 44%. So either way, you're losing about 7 to 8 percentage points of critical hit chance. So maybe that's not a huge difference, especially when you consider that this character hits really hard even when they're not getting a critical hit. I haven't done like more extended math to see what's your average damage in the long run with this, 36% chance plus smites versus 44% chance without smites, right? But anyway, if you build the character this way, you're essentially making yourself have slightly fewer critical hits in exchange for having the option to make those critical hits do even more damage when you get them. I haven't tried playing it this way, but it looks to me like it might actually be good. Like it might be a worthwhile trade. Honestly, the next time I play a new campaign, I might try this version. If you do want to have smites in this build, this is the way I would do it. So that's kind of the decision of whether to go for smites or not. Now let's look at the other choice I mentioned, whether to be a Hexblade instead of a Bladesinger. Hexblade actually gives you a lot of the same things as Bladesinger. You can cast your 5th level Shadow Blade, and you can get extra attack if you take Pact of the Blade. It also has some differences from Bladesinger which might be nice, like might be better than Bladesinger. One of those is if you want to focus more on attacking and less on casting control spells, then with Hexblade, you don't have so many wasted spell slots, which you do in Bladesinger. So this is a potential limitation of the Bladesinger build, is that if you really just want to use all your actions to attack, then you've got like a billion second level and third level spell slots, which you're not using all day. It's kind of a waste. Whereas with Hexblade, you don't have that. You just have a few big spell slots so that you can cast your Shadow Blade, and then maybe you use the rest to have a big armor of Agathis up all the time or something like that. Right? So that's potentially a benefit of the Hexblade build compared to the Bladesinger. Another benefit, your ability scores don't have to be so spread around because both your attacks and your spell DC use Charisma. Whereas with Bladesinger, if you want to be good at both attacking and at casting control spells, then you need both dexterity and intelligence. It's a slight limitation. This is not a huge benefit of Hexblade though, because like I said, like one of the benefits of Hexblade could be if you just want to be attacking. And if you're just attacking, then who really cares what your spell DC is? All right. So third benefit of Hexblade is that you get Hexblade's Curse, which is a nice way to get more critical hits and a little bit more damage against those priority targets. You can't use it all the time, but you can use it on big bosses, use it in emergencies, stuff like that. And the last and biggest benefit of Hexblade compared to Bladesinger is that the Hexblade doesn't twirl around when they attack with a short sword. So that fixes the greatest weakness of the Bladesinger build. So those are the benefits of the Hexblade route. But the Hexblade route has also potentially a few drawbacks compared to Bladesinger. The biggest one, I think, is that you don't have Blade Song, which is a really useful and powerful ability in Act 1. So I think being a Bladesinger in Act 1 just helps you stay alive until the build gets really good, and you're not getting that with a Hexblade. That being said, by Act 3, it might not matter so much. I mean, honestly, by Act 3 with a Bladesinger, I just keep forgetting to use it, or I use it and then I forget to do the big healing at the end of it. So this is really a drawback only at the early game and probably not at the late game. Another drawback is, well, it's actually the same thing as what I called a benefit earlier. It's the fact that you don't have those tons of level 1 spell slots for recasting your concentration spells or other little things. So I mentioned before, this could actually be a benefit if you're not planning on casting spells a lot anyway. But if you are planning on casting spells a lot, it's a drawback, right? So imagine that you want to have concentration up to keep your strange conduit ring going, but then every now and then you really want to cast fear, or you really want to cast hold monster, you really want to cast haste or something like that. Every time you do that, you're losing your concentration because those spells go down after a few rounds. And then once you've lost your concentration, you need a rinky-dink first level spell slot to put back up your protection from evil and good or whatever. So in those kind of situations, it's really useful to have those extra little level 1 spell slots, and you're not getting those if you're playing the Hexblade route. That being said, like I said earlier, this isn't really a problem if you just want to focus on attacking all the time and if you don't lose your concentration very much. If that's your situation, then you don't need all those spell slots. You just use your Ever-Seeing Eye amulet once per short rest and you're good. And to be honest, concentration doesn't even matter a ton in this build, because the extra damage that you're getting from concentration with the Strange Conduit Ring, like, yeah, it's nice, but it's a drop in the bucket compared to what you're getting from your Shadow Blade. So really, what I think is the breakdown of this spell slot issue is that if you want to do a more Gish sort of play style where you're usually attacking, but you're sometimes also throwing in a haste or a fear or something like that, then the Bladesinger is going to serve you better than the Hexblade. But if you just want to go all in with your attacking and you don't want to waste an action casting a spell when you could be using that action to do 100 damage to someone, then the Hexblade might be what you want. So those are one of the drawbacks and another potential drawback. The last drawback is that you don't have potential for smites with Hexblade like you do with Bladesinger. Of course, you could get the smites by sacrificing your 5th level spell slots, or by sacrificing all of your fighter levels. But as I talked about earlier, I don't think either of those options is very good. And the option that does work for Bladesinger, right, the Bladesinger 6 Paladin 2 option, Bladesinger 8 Paladin 2 option, that option just doesn't work for Hexblade because Warlock spell slots don't combine with other spell slots. So if you go the Hexblade route, you just don't have a way to get smites and also keep the build good. So those were the limitations and the alternatives. There you have it, the Shadowblade Crit Fisher. A character who crits for triple digit damage about half the time, and who does like 60 damage per hit even when they're not critting, and who can drop great spells like Hold Monster and Fear on top of all that. I have had an absolute blast playing with this character, so I hope you'll give it a try and see how it goes.